If the cassava phase 3 trial works by December, I will shave my head bald, delete my Twitter, transition to Martina with, everything. Surgery, full transition, hormones, all that.
Martin Shkreli, Bernie Madoff, Sam Bankman-Fried, Ken Lai, and Jeff Skilling. These names all have one thing in common. All of these men have been convicted of securities fraud. Our world is littered with financial deplorables and hucksters, and they deserve the hate we give them. With people's money is pure evil. But in the same breath, to group Martin Shkreli with these other men doesn't seem right. And I'm not alone in this thought. There's a growing narrative that casts Shkreli not as a villain, but as a sort of renegade hero, an indignant outsider challenging and profiting from a broken system. Really, at its core, Shkreli embodies a dual narrative, each shaped wildly different depending on your perspective. On one hand, there's this ruthless hedge fund manager turned pharma bro who, overnight, hiked the price of a life-saving HIV drug from $13 a pill to $750 a pill, earning him the label the most hated man in America and a 7-year prison sentence for securities fraud. And on the other hand, there's this story of a kid who grew up poor in Brooklyn, born to Albanian immigrants, who was a self-taught financial prodigy. He dropped out of high school to join a hedge fund at 16. He started 2 hedge funds before age 25, and he built his own fortune from scratch. He dared to challenge a broken system from the inside. So which one is it? Who is the real Martin Shkreli? And how did he go from being the most hated man in the US to becoming this sort of underground Main Street anti-hero? And perhaps most importantly, should you listen to him? He's extremely prolific online today, and he shares tons of advice. To answer that, we'll look at a few key moments from his career so far. But first, if you like this type of content, please consider giving us a like and subscribe. Alright, to kick off this discussion, let's start with his most infamous act, the one that got him the title of the most hated man in America, the Daraprim scandal. As I'm sure you've heard, Shkreli bought the rights to a life-saving drug, Daraprim, and hiked the price 5,000% overnight. And the public outlash was insane.
That is bad actors making a fortune off of people's misfortune.
For those of you who weren't around in 2015, it is not an exaggeration to say that this story broke the internet. Martin Shkreli appeared on CNBC. He was heckled on late night. He even got called in front of Congress to testify, where he refused to give answers by invoking his Fifth Amendment rights, all while smirking. You had articles literally being written trying to understand the scientific reasons why he had such a punchable face. Since 2015, he's had a lot of time to talk about his defense for this, and he has 3 major reasons for this action. First, he claims that drug companies do this all the time, and that he's not anything different. He just couldn't hide it as well as Big Pharma because he's an outsider. And second, he claimed that 60% of all revenue from Daraprim would go towards research and development for better drugs. And third, he claimed that he would make sure anyone who needed the drug would get it. Here he is in an interview.
To decrease access to a medicine would be so deplorable. The media hasn't been able to produce one person who couldn't afford our drug. It just wouldn't work that way. They'd call the company, or their doctor would call the company and say, what are you going to do about this? And we'd FedEx you the drug for free. This really cheap drug, just saying, look, let's make this normal price. Or even, quite frankly, below normal price. And I'll use that money to do great research, not to fatten my pocket.
And he's right. The media hasn't been able to identify anyone who died from lack of access to this drug. And I believe if there was someone out there, they would have been recorded. This story was so big. So in that regard, I think the media overreacted. But in terms of giving 60% to research and development, there's simply no proof that that was actually the plan. It seems like it was more of a PR stunt to reduce blowback. In preparing for his congressional testimony, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform received over 250,000 internal documents from Shkreli's company. And they had a whole section talking about how the PR strategy was used to distract from the price increases. And in my research, I couldn't find anything that shows that he actually did allocate that much to R&D. So this is a black mark on his career. There's no question about that. But he also has some points. He saw that a drug was mispriced and leapt at the opportunity. And then he did posture to reduce blowback. Isn't that what every company does? But I also want to be very clear here. He didn't go to prison for this. He went to prison for securities fraud. So even if this was a black mark, let's look at the actual crimes. So in 2015, amidst the outrage from the Daraprim price hike, the FBI arrested Shkreli over securities fraud. Shkreli was accused of orchestrating elaborate schemes to defraud investors in his two hedge funds, MSMB Capital and MSMB Healthcare. They say that he did it by issuing false performance reports, making misleading promises, and misappropriating investor funds. The feds detailed how Shkreli's actions convinced investors to commit millions of dollars based on inflated and deceptive representations of the fund's true value. For instance, in the Justice Department's press release following his conviction, they made it sound really heinous. The U.S. Attorney Richard Donahue said, quote, "For years, Shkreli told lie after lie in order to steal his investors' money, manipulate the stock market, and enrich himself. He will now pay the price for repeatedly violating the trust placed in him by his investors, his employees, and the public." Yikes, that's intense. So his investors must have lost millions of dollars in these lies, right? Well, that's the thing. They didn't lose any money. In fact, some investors made money. Several witnesses told the jury that they ended up with multi-million-dollar profits. One person invested $1.25 million and got $1.6 million out. Another person made $2.7 million in profit from a $300,000 investment. Now, it's also claimed that they did struggle for years to get this money back, but still, those aren't bad returns. And this seems wildly different from what FBI Assistant Director in Charge William Sweeney said. He said, quote, "Martin Shkreli was notoriously ambitious, seeking to enrich himself at the expense of those who unwittingly invested in his lies." That seems pretty harsh when you consider there was no harm done. So what was he actually found guilty of? First, lying to investors. According to the Justice Department, Shkreli lied about the value of his funds that he managed. At one point, he claimed that they had a value of $100 million, when the actual net asset value of the fund fell to around negative 33 cents. Okay, that's not great, but he was shorting biopharma stocks. That's notoriously volatile. Second was withdrawing investor funds, both to himself and to cover his failing hedge fund. The Justice Department found that he withdrew $200,000 from MSMB Capital, which was far more than the 1% management fee and the 20% net profit allocation permitted by the fund's partnership agreement. And then third was stock manipulation. It's alleged that he was hiding ownership of Retrofin stock by recruiting associates to make it look like they're the actual shareholders, so it didn't look like Martin Shkreli had such a controlling interest. So what does Martin Shkreli think of these things? He maintains his innocence to this day. Here's what he said following the verdict.
This was a witch hunt of epic proportions, and maybe they found one or two broomsticks, but at the end of the day, we've been acquitted of the most important charges in this case, and I'm delighted to report that.
Okay, that was the main scandal. That is what he became a felon over. That's why he went to prison. And he paid his debt to society. He did serious time for this. And a lot of people, including legal experts, think that this punishment was overly harsh. So even if we look past this, that still doesn't really answer the question. Should we listen to him? And is he a good guy? After his release from prison in 2022, Shkreli quickly reemerged onto the public stage. He launched a new Web3 venture called Drug-like and a related Martin Shkreli Inu coin. These were launched as part of his effort to revolutionize drug discovery through the blockchain. But that didn't go well. The crypto project faced a 90% crash after an alleged rug pull by Shkreli. Now, he claims this was due to a hack, and he made a whole video showing proof that it was a hack and it wasn't his own action.
Well, maybe, according to Destiny, I was phishing people in prison in December. Maybe I was doing that from a cell phone, and I was sending it all around servers around the world. It's possible. It doesn't prove anything.
But if I'm being intellectually honest, it still seems a little suspect, and I watched the video. I'll let you make the determination on that. I'll provide the link to his explanation in the description below. But that's 2022. What else has he been doing since prison? Well, today he's known for his live streams and helping out everyday investors. Sure, he does it with a bit of sensationalism, but this stuff is dry. Sometimes you have to do stuff to make it more entertaining. I know this as a financial content creator. It's not easy. And he's also launched a pretty cool software platform. He's created a Bloomberg competitor for everyday people called Godel, and I tested it. It's pretty cool. Although it's not really focused on the type of investing I do, which is Buffett-styled fundamental analysis, but he's also a pretty big Buffett fan. And I've watched a good bit of his live streams and researching for this. I mean, he's literally doing one right now as I shoot this. And it's cool. You can ask him to research a company and he'll help you out. He's incredibly accessible. And this is really refreshing. He brings professional insight to individual investors. He made this post on Wall Street Bet years before it became popular, talking about how you shouldn't YOLO. He talks about how investing is an art, sometimes a science, which is focused on the careful allocation of risk units in exchange for reward units. The smart investor understands that he is always taking some sort of risk, even in treasury bonds, and that the YOLO term undermines the central point of investing, and that this roll the dice mentality is amateurish. and that becoming wealthy is difficult and requires immense patience. This is such a better way than most professionals treat individual investors. They call us dumb money, and they try to convince us that we're too dumb to understand these things. They sit in their ivory towers and claim that investing is some arcane science that they can only understand. And that's simply not true. And fighting against that narrative is what we're all about at Flank. We believe that people are better investors than they realize, despite Wall Street trying to tell them over and over again that they're not. We think it's just the current ecosystem really sucks, and we're working really hard to fix that. If you want to learn more about what we're all about at Flank, there'll be a link to our site in the description. There's also a link to our free Discord. I'd love to see you there. So, is Martin Shkreli a good guy now? Well, he's definitely not innocent, but in recent years, he gives really good advice to individual investors. He cautioned people against the quantum bubble. He fights against shitcoins. Perhaps in his best example, he ran a campaign against Cassava Sciences, which was seeking a cure that would diminish Alzheimer's. I mean, the lead researcher went to jail for falsifying these results. And Martin called this out. He shared his analysis, and he delivered it in a really entertaining, funny way. And he was right. The stock did eventually plummet. So Martin Shkreli is complex at the very least. He's certainly not the boogeyman that the media originally painted him out to be. And I have a feeling this isn't the last time we'll cover him on this channel. I think overall he's a net good for the individual investing community today. He brings professional insight to Main Street, and he does it in a really accessible and entertaining way. But I certainly wouldn't give him my own money to invest. There's just too much history. But there are certainly people out there that are way more deplorable, like Robert Kiyosaki. If you want to see our coverage on him, you'll see that over my shoulder now. That's all for this one. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.